We mentioned the 6-axis model a session or two ago and talked about how vital it was for our conversations and our communication to level up these abilities. We have vulnerability, openness, connection, suggestibility, focus, and excitement, which we want towards the end of the interaction, towards the end. And the final one that's not here is novelty. We talked a lot about novelty and how that manufactures focus, because focus is a currency. Throughout this process, what we've learned is a way to hear the words, the phrases, the movements, the topics, the subjects, every single thing that that person needs to hear. And I'd like you to view this as a cross-section of a lock. Inside of a lock, we have all kinds of pins, and the pins in every lock are different sizes. For even the same brand manufacturer, same brand, the pins are different sizes. And that's why keys are cut differently to push different sized pins up so a lock can turn. Most persuasion training, in fact, I think all that I've seen, relies on trying as hard as you can to pick the lock. We're reaching in, we can't really see everything that's inside of the lock. So we're reaching in with a lock pick and jiggling around the lock pick the entire conversation, trying to get those pins to start turning, trying to get the lock to start turning. And that's the example where we see the sales that never make it to fruition. The customer says no at the end of a sale. The jury votes in a way against your favor. The client says they're not really interested in working with you. The prisoner or suspect doesn't wind up confessing to the crime. That's because we've jiggled the lock for so long and we're unable to figure out everything. But in those 14-hour interrogations, we have a captive audience. If we were in a sales situation and we could lock our customers in a room for 14 hours, we'd probably be able to jiggle that lockpick long enough to get the lock to open up. But this behavioral compass and this 6-axis model shows you what the lock looks like. So we're no longer working with a lockpick. We're working with a key. And that's the entire reason that this one system, aside from the other trainings that I do, but this one system is the core system that has enabled me to go from a 10-hour interrogation to 18, 20 minutes. We're not lock picking anymore. We don't need to pick the lock when we have a key. And it doesn't take long to get a camera in there, basically, if we're going to stick with this metaphor. We're putting a camera inside the lock and getting a look at it before we have a full conversation. So we know what the key is supposed to look like. And that key is our behavior, our voice, our words, our actions throughout the conversation. And with this, what I'd like to do is share one influence technique with you from my more advanced course. And this technique is small enough that you could write the entire technique out on a Post-it note or a bumper sticker. And I'm going to beg you not to assume that the technique is simplistic because it's easy to explain or easy to do. This is one of the most powerful influence techniques I think that you might ever hear. This is just my opinion. And it's called negative dissociation. And negative dissociation is only a conversational trick of the mind, but we're using a few principles here. And before I talk about the technique, I'll explain one of the principles behind it. Robert Cialdini wrote a book called Influence back in the day. It was extremely inspirational for me. And one of the things that drove me to create this system was because I would read these books and it has this massively impressive work of academics that have spent a long time studying human behavior. And every time I got to the end of a chapter, I was waiting for them to say, okay, and that's the basics of the psychology of the experiment. And now here's 55 ways that you can use it. And none of those books ever talked about how you can actually use any of that stuff. So I wanted to make that book, and that's the reason I wrote my book. But negative dissociation works on a principle from Cialdini's book called the consistency principle. And in the consistency principle, there were two neighborhoods. So we have a neighborhood here and a neighborhood here. Each neighborhood makes a median income of $230,000 a year. And they're pretty much identical. Same cars in the driveway, same grass, same houses. So these researchers go to one neighborhood and they ask people, will you put this big metal sign in your yard, like a real estate type of sign, and it says, please drive safe? Will you put this sign in your yard? They go to the other neighborhood, they ask them the same question. Will you jab this sign down in your yard? It just says, please drive safe. In one neighborhood, they got 11% of people that said yes. In the other neighborhood, 89% of people said yes. And the difference between the neighborhoods was that in the other neighborhood where 89% of people said yes, just a few weeks earlier, they went house to house with a clipboard. And the homeowner would open their door up and the guy would be standing there on the front doorstep and he'd say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to bother you. I just want to ask you a one question survey. I'm not selling anything and I'll be gone. And the homeowner would be like, yeah, what is it? What's up? And he said, do you support safe driving? Of course. I mean, it's 100% of us are going to say that we support safe driving. It's a stupid question. So, of course, people said yes. And then since they said yes, he asked them for one more quick, small favor. And he gave them a tiny sticker. And the sticker was just a please drive safe sticker. And he says, can you just do me a favor and put this where it faces out your front window towards the street? And of course, people were like, yeah, it's a small sticker, not a big deal. I'll stick it on a window. So since they had made that commitment 4 weeks earlier, they were somewhere around the likes of 200 to 600% more likely to say yes in a future scenario, just because they had made an agreement to behave a certain way. And that is really profound. So I'm going to teach you 2 ways that we can hack that consistency principle. And I've got a lot of hacks, a lot of behavioral hacks, but I'll teach you 2 that use this principle in conversation.